Hi everyone, this video is going to take you through the new instructional model for reading. It's based on the current instructional model and is informed by best practice approaches to teaching reading that the literacy team have been learning about through courses like BASTO over the past 18 months. The video outlines what the key phases of the model are and it provides some examples to support you in your planning over the coming weeks. The lesson should start with some sort of front loading. This will usually be vocabulary, but might also be some key piece of information students need to know. Whatever it is, it should support students to access the content that you're going to be teaching or the reading that you're going to be asking them to do during the lesson. It needs to be high value. You only have 4 to 5, maybe 6 words to supply during this phase of the lesson, or a key piece of information or background reading. Be careful and be very selective about what you teach here, because a lot of words that they'll encounter can be read around, they can be understood using context clues, or they might be things that they'll only see in this reading and they'll never see again. So make sure you teach them the parts that are going to be roadblocks and that are going to be particularly useful in helping them comprehend. You can ask yourself these questions. Is the vocabulary or the concept repeated or reused? And by this I mean, is it repeated or reused in the text or in your subject? The word dispossession, for example, is a really high value word when teaching Nanberry. Students will be able to use it in class, they'll be able to use it when they're talking about the text, they might come across it in the text, and they're almost certainly going to be able to use it in their own writing. Ask yourself, is the word transferable? Are they going to be able to transfer the words or the concepts into future lessons or other subjects? This concept of dispossession, kids are going to be able to take into humanities. They're going to take it into year 9, where we talk about Indigenous rights, looking at something like In My Blood It Runs. And is it an obstacle to understanding? A text like Malala, for example, has a lot of words such as hijab and Quran that refer to very cultural specific things. Teaching students these is going to open up a lot of doors for them as they read. When you front load, you're encouraged to use the front loading template, such as the one shown on screen now, which has been designed for use with the book thief. The template exposes students to a variety of features of words in a really structured way. Things like the images that we might associate with them, examples of the word being used in sentences, what parts of speech the word is, and synonyms. It's important that if you do front loading, you try to include these various parts, even if you're choosing to kind of adapt this template in some way. There are some examples on the Literacy Hub of how you might do this to make it a little bit more interactive for students. Whatever you do decide to do, students should do something small with it. Things like sticky note sentences, sharing a sentence with a partner, or posting a sentence in the chat if you're using it via remote learning. It should go for about 5 minutes. It might run a little bit longer if you make an activity of it, but it really should be an introductory part of the lesson and shouldn't chew up too much of your time. The next phase is something that we should all be familiar with. The learning intention and success criteria from the regular instructional model have been carried over. The only difference is that it should be really focused on the reading strategy, not the content. You might be teaching Nanberry, you might be teaching Wonder, you might be teaching language analysis. Whatever the content, whatever that really kind of English specific side of things is, the focus of this lesson should be reading. So it should be focusing on how to use a specific strategy to help you access that content and improve your comprehension of it. Some examples might be to learn how to use question stems when asking ourselves questions while reading, to be able to identify the words in a text that help readers visualize, or to access our background knowledge or schema while reading to deepen connections. Next, we introduce the reading strategy that we're going to be teaching for the session. This phase is essentially a mini lesson. You should be introducing new reading strategies, reviewing previously taught ones, or deepening students' understanding of them. It's where you're teaching in a really highly structured, really explicit way. And it's where you're probably going to be using a PowerPoint, modeling with an example on the board, or showing some kind of YouTube video as a way of explaining to students the process of what this reading strategy is, how it works, and why we use them. I don't really think there's a need for students to be taking notes during this phase of the lesson because it's something we should be exposing them to regularly enough that it becomes routine and it becomes automatic. All up, it shouldn't go for much more than 10 minutes before you move on to showing students how to use and how to apply this strategy using a Think Aloud. This is the Think Aloud section of the lesson. It aligns with the construct meaning phase of the current instructional model because here we're really trying to build students' understandings of these reading strategies and show them how they will be applying them. As the teacher at the front of the room, you should have some kind of short text and you should be reading it aloud. Ideally, students will have access to it through projector, through photocopies, through their laptops, and you should be showing students how the expert reads. As you're reading, you're pausing to describe and to explain to students the metacognitive processes that are happening. You'll generally be focusing on the one strategy that you've been teaching for this lesson or that you're focusing on. But you should also try to show students that other strategies are used simultaneously and to support. For example, in a lesson on inferencing, you might pause a number of times to ask questions and to show students that making connections supports those inferences. It shouldn't go for much more than 10 minutes. And in most cases, it should use a very short text, such as a paragraph, perhaps a few paragraphs, or at most a single page of the text. Here's an example of a Think Aloud using a passage from the Book Thief, questioning and inferencing as the reading strategies, being taught via Zoom to a Year 9 class. Okay, so guys, we've just spent the last few minutes looking at how we use these why questions to help us make inferences as we read. Okay, so I'm going to do a Think Aloud in a moment, and I'm going to be modeling for you how I use these why questions, these between the lines questions, to set me up to make an inference. Okay, we've used these question stems in the past. We're not going to be using kind of the rest of the PowerPoint. We're just using this section here between the lines. Okay, so as I read, I'm going to be trying to use those questions to really understand the text in a meaningful way. So while I get that open, I just need you guys ready, paying attention to the way I read this passage. Okay, paying attention to how I use these reading strategies, questioning to lead into inferencing. Okay, and I might even make a few more along the way, right? Because it's often they're all kind of happening at once. And I want to obviously pay attention to how I'm annotating it, okay? Because you guys will be doing this soon too. I'm going to use the first or one of the, I think it's the second passage from the prologue of the Book Thief, okay? And you guys will be doing passage 2 and 3 in breakout rooms later. All right, so you'll be doing very similar to what I'm doing here. So, beside the railway line, my first question, I've immediately got a question. Why are we beside the railway line? Why is it important? Why is that railway line important? First up is something white of the blinding kind. Okay, why is there multiple kinds of white? Why the blinding kind? Okay, what does this mean? Some of you are most likely thinking that white is not really a color, and all of that tired sort of nonsense. Well, I'm here to tell you that it is. White is without question a color, and personally, I don't think you want to argue with me. You know, this reminds me of this is a text to self-connection. Right? I remember learning about shades and colors in school. Okay, so I remember there was this whole discussion one day in Miss Edwards' class about whether white is a shade or a color. Okay, so this guy's telling us it's a color. A reassuring announcement. Please be calm. Despite that previous threat, I am all bluster. I am not violent. I am not malicious. I am a result. So there's this bit kind of in bold. He's telling us some stuff about himself. He's all bluster. So why is he all bluster? What does this mean? He says he's not violent, he's not malicious. Does that mean he's like, my inference, I guess, does that mean he is just, putting it on? Pretending? Is he acting? Okay. So yes, it was white. It felt as though the whole globe was dressed in snow, like it had pulled it on, the way you pull on a sweater. Next to the train line, footprints were sunken to their shins. Trees wore blankets of ice. All right, so I notice immediately we've got personification. Okay, the whole globe was dressed in snow. We've got hyperbole because like the whole globe actually wasn't dressed in snow. It's probably just a region of the world. And I'm going to ask myself, why does the author want us to imagine snow everywhere? Why does he want us to kind of picture in our minds to visualize snow just encompassing everything? And you know what? There's actually another reading strategy kind of happening there. Visualization. This is a bit that really helps me picture this scene as just being like white everywhere. As you might expect, someone had died. They couldn't just leave him on the ground. For now, it wasn't such a problem, but very soon the track ahead would be cleared and the train would need to move on. Well, I've got a question. It's maybe not. It's not one of those why questions. It's where is the train heading? Okay, so it's a different question word, but it's still a question that's kind of coming into my mind. Where is the train heading, and why does it? There's my why question. Why is it so important that it has to leave? That it has to go? There were two guards. All right, why are there two guards? Why are there guards on this train? If I think back, I know like last week we learned sort of about how during this book we see the Holocaust and how all those Jewish people were murdered during World War II. Maybe, okay, if I make a connection to something I learned last week, my kind of text to world connection helps me here. Text to world connection. Maybe this is one of those trains that was taking the Jews to the labor camps and the death camps we learned about. Now we come to the largest section of the lesson, apply and annotate. This is the phase of the lesson where students are applying what they've learned and seen you modelling earlier. It should be the longest section, probably about half an hour in class or 20 minutes if delivering via remote learning. They should be doing it in pairs, small groups, or in breakout rooms if you're using Zoom. And the text that they're using should be pretty short as well, probably no more than 2 to 3 pages. They can be doing a variety of activities however you want, but there must be some annotating involved. They should be making comments on the text that give us access to how they are using these reading strategies, which serves as really good formative assessment for us to see how they're going. Additionally, for the students, by recording them, it makes their thinking tangible and shows them how these things that often are invisible to them are actually happening behind the scenes. During this time, the teacher should be monitoring students and supporting where needed. If teaching remotely, this is as simple as moving through the breakout rooms, checking up on students, asking them to share their screen, and keep working while you watch for a bit, as a way of gauging where they're at. In class, obviously students are likely to be annotating directly onto a text, using something like a printed copy or their actual books or novels. In a remote learning environment, however, some of the best platforms to support digital annotation are Word and Google Slides. This example here uses Word. Following a lesson about the important details to search for when reading a persuasive text, things like publication details, the contention, arguments and techniques, each student downloaded the document from a Compass Learning task. Then they were put into breakout rooms in pairs and asked to annotate the important details. Sometimes it might be a little bit trickier getting kids to annotate, especially if the text can't easily be transferred to something digital. This example uses Nanberry. We've got a page scanned from the book on the left-hand side, with instructions on the right-hand side telling students how to annotate simply by copying the quotes that they're referring to. There's some little additional steps like highlighting parts of speech and an instruction around making sure they explain their annotations to really support them. This next example had students working in pairs on Google Slides. It was a lesson on making connections using I Am Malala. Notice how the passages are quite short. Students were asked to put their name to a slide and add 4 annotations each, including a summary of the passage. If they logged in anonymously, they just added their name to each comment. They did this in breakout rooms, and one of the reasons Google Slides was chosen is because when students edit a slide, it doesn't impact students using other slides, like with what happens in Google Docs when kids are editing different pages. Finally, there should be about 10 minutes devoted to reflection. This is where we really want students to reflect on what they've been doing during the lesson, how it's developed with their reading, and how they might transfer these skills elsewhere. Activities could include asking them to produce a written explanation of the strategy, how they applied it, and how they might use it elsewhere. We might ask them to produce some kind of reflection on what new meaning they've taken away from the text by using the strategy with reference to their annotations. Or we might ask them to pick one of those annotations and do some kind of small writing activity with it. These sections could be quite structured, and they might even include providing students with a set of questions to answer and to guide them. The last thing I want to show everybody is the new Literacy Hub, a website that's been put together to collect all of the literacy resources and all the instructional strategies that we've delivered over the last few months and will probably deliver over the next few months into one easily accessible place. As you can see on the screen, there's a whole section on the new instructional model. There's a whole section on the reading comprehension strategies with a lot more detail about each of those strategies individually. There's also sections on front loading, on EMC notes, and there'll be sections on some of the other things like annotating in future. It's definitely a work in progress, but hopefully over the next few weeks, it will serve as a starting point for a lot of people out there who might want to recap or at least might want some ideas to get them started. There's nothing stopping people going on Google and having a hunt around, but I would hope this will serve as a really good starting point for everyone at the school. The instructional model for reading has been designed to ensure that every student at EMC has access to the best teaching of reading that we can offer. I hope it will support us to support students in becoming the best young readers they can be. If you have any questions or would like to chat about implementing this in your classrooms, feel free to have a chat to any of the literacy team members at the school.